What a
And we
great
are
way to do it.
live on the YouTubes. Welcome everybody to the Gunner Technology Livestream, a weekly 20-minute tech talk for non-techies and techies alike. I'm your host, Derry Merkins. With me is Cody Swan, CEO of Gunner Technology. How you doing, Cody?
I'm good. I'm good. I think we got our pregame warm up in last night, and so I'm ready to exceed expectations today.
Shout out to our sponsor, Country Shore, a lifestyle brand for anyone who likes the outdoors. We have another winner today from our Country Shore giveaway contest, which you can sign up for on our Facebook page. So this is Jeremy from Macon, Georgia. Jeremy S. from Macon, Georgia. So do you have your UGA hat? I might have my UGA hat somewhere around here.
I'm wearing the LSU hat today, purple and gold.
It's too bad we didn't get a Baton Rouge guy.
Yeah.
But Jeremy, we'll send you a lovely red and black UGA hat to that you can wear when you cry about the national championship game. So this week, our topic is part 2 of a conversation about what we are now calling the Big Five instead of the Big Four. Week 1 was Big Four, and we accidentally slipped into a Big Five blog post. So we're going to pretend that this has always been a conversation about the Big Five. But just to catch everybody up, last week we talked about Apple, Amazon, Google, and Facebook.
No. Disney.
Okay. Apple, Google, Amazon, and Disney, and Cody added Facebook, which is weird because I think in our description last week we actually had Facebook as one of the Big Four. So anyways, we're all over the place. But the gist of the conversation was Google is going to control search. Apple is going to control hardware. Amazon is going to control retail. Disney is going to control media, and Facebook is going to control, I guess we call it social.
Yeah, so it was kind of like we formed it around the internet being the future, which if you don't agree with that at this point, I don't know what you've been doing. But we kind of said, yeah, that Google is going to control what you see on the internet. Facebook's going to control how you communicate on the internet. Apple is going to control how you access the internet. Amazon is going to control what you buy on the internet. And Disney is going to control the content which is on the internet.
Okay, so from that perspective, and I guess if we talked about, are you sure we didn't talk about Facebook last time? I should have reviewed the actual video. But why don't we do both of them? Just Facebook and Disney. How do they come to control their respective arenas, and I guess why?
Well, Disney was a weird one. I mean, kind of weird in the fact that it started off as a purely animation studio, and they were a very average corporation for the longest time. Kind of, they had their ups and downs in terms of their content availability. Really, they hit their stride under Michael Eisner in the 80s and 90s. That string of successes that started with The Little Mermaid, and went through Lion King, Aladdin, and all those really are what kicked off the expansion of Disney as a media conglomerate. And so Disney went from being at first an animation studio to an animation studio and a theme park to kind of a content distributor, all the way to the point where they were buying up other companies left and right until they were distributing, movies all over the place, movies and television all over the place. But humble beginnings as an animation studio, they kind of grew to the point where they started under Eisner acquiring a lot of different companies, and continued under the leadership of Bob Iger, including this latest Fox acquisition. So that's kind of where they came from.
And what's interesting, because I looked this up, because I was interested in what the market shares were for the Big Five. And I think in terms of revenues, if Disney does acquire Fox, it would be 46% of media revenues would be coming directly to Disney at that point.
Yes, right now they're number 2 in revenue behind Comcast, but that's excluding the Fox deal, which would push them way ahead of Comcast overall in revenue.
And then as far as Facebook goes, because I want to get into the topic for today, but a quick overview of Facebook's rise to the king of how we communicate on the internet.
Yeah, so Facebook did something that was pretty intelligent in the fact that they started as a closed social network, at first only available to Harvard students, and then later all Ivy League students, and then the majority, and then all of universities, then a select few companies, which include, I didn't realize that a select few companies got access, like Apple and Microsoft and a few big ones, and then high schools, and then everyone. So they kind of had a controlled environment in some respects, which helped them avoid the demise of social networks like Friendster and MySpace, which became cesspools as the general public flooded the network. And so Facebook did something that was also really smart in the fact that they allowed brands to start creating Facebook profiles, which are called pages today, and supplied these pages, which are also can double as advertisers, all this data that Facebook collects on their users, which if you don't know, Facebook collects a lot of data on every user and probably knows more about you than you yourself know. So they provide that data, not directly. So for example, they don't sell Disney Cody Swan's profile, which then Disney can go see what Cody Swan is all about. But they share the data in aggregate. So they allow Disney to, say, for example, target people whose favorite movie is like Training Day or something like that. That's how they made their money, is through advertising, by kind of opening up everything they know about their users.
And there's actually an interesting overlap there, because I also saw something that Google and Facebook, I think, control, it was either 70 or 80% of online advertising.
Yeah, and it's
sort of a duopoly there.
Right, and it's further interesting in so much the click-through rate is really what drives advertising revenue. And a very quick overview of that: if you're an advertiser and you have an ad on Facebook or Google, I'm simplifying here, but generally you get charged. Your account gets charged every time someone clicks your ad. You don't get charged unless someone clicks your ad. And interestingly enough, the click-through rate on Facebook is minuscule compared to Google. So it's kind of interesting because it goes to intent. And it also would give me reason to be concerned if I were a Facebook investor. Facebook is not where people go where they're intending to spend money. Google, much more so, because they have intent. Usually you're looking for something when you go to Google. Facebook, you're kind of just like hanging out. It's the difference between when you're a teenager and you went to the mall as a social event versus when you need something and you go to the mall. But no one goes to the mall anyway, so that was just a horrible analogy.
Although they might just be ahead of the game, because we might be heading for an age that's somewhat similar. Do you remember that movie Minority Report, where Tom Cruise is walking around and it's basically just advertisements popping up everywhere, telling him all this stuff that he needs or should buy?
And Back to the Future 2, man.
Yeah, where that giant Jaws came for what was it, like Jaws 11 or something at that point?
Something like that. Yeah. But yeah, when in Minority Report, like virtual hardware would recognize Tom Cruise and be like, "Hi there, Tom Cruise. Wouldn't you like to wear this scarf?" kind of thing.
Yeah. We haven't seen you in a while. Stop in. We're right down the street.
Yes.
So that's sort of a good introduction to where we're heading today, which is, and I guess as a brief aside, there already is competition in all of these domains. I think the most competitive domain is probably the hardware one, where I think Windows operating systems still outnumber OS X 4-1, and I think Android is something like 80% of the global market share. Although the numbers have only been going in one direction in that sense, and also that's the global overview is different than the, say, US overview, which is sort of our wheelhouse, and also it's different in terms of the industry that we work in. Within the tech industry, there's a lot of difference in terms of the types of hardware that people use. But
the question, market share, on that note, it's important to keep in mind that the Windows market share, which is an operating system, is fractured. It's spread out among Dell, Lenovo, Acer. It's fractured. When you talk about Mac OS, which is Mac's operating system, it's just Apple. So they don't have the largest market share, but they have the largest consolidated market share.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the same thing applies to Android and iOS.
Correct.
But the question of the day is, who's going to compete with these big five, and how are they going to do it?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because if they could all just agree to carve out their own niche and let it stay that way. I say niche, a very large niche, and let it stay that way. I don't think anyone could, but they actually could end up bringing their own demise because, for example, you talked about operating system and competition there, but aside from Disney, um, all the rest of those four are competing right now over home automation, and they're competing over a lot of other things, which I understand why they're salivating over that, but they're kind of getting away from their core competencies. Like take for example, like the new voice assistant, and Facebook actually just dropped theirs, so they're out of it. But you have Alexa with the Echo Dots and the Echo. And my Alexa just came on when I said that. But you have Alexa, you have Google Home, and you have what is Apple?
Siri.
Yeah, you have Siri and Apple Kit. So you have all these. The three big ones are really competing for that market, and it's kind of interesting because they're big enough where I don't think they'll lose sight. But if they get away from that sector they control, they kind of open it up to allow competition from other areas.
And I think there's other realms too where they're competing. VR, Google and Facebook are
Right.
sort of in direct competition there.
And Apple's going there too.
So just the infighting might provide the opportunity for someone to swoop in and steal up that market. I think the only thing there is their abilities to purchase anyone.
Right.
I mean, Oculus could have competed with Google and Facebook, but now Facebook just bought them.
Right. Exactly. That's exactly right. And that's kind of their hedge against kind of outside competition. They're going to buy anyone before they become a threat, which is exactly
not to mention that all these companies have huge outlays of cash just lying around.
Right. Right. I mean, we're talking about revenues in the hundreds of billions of dollars. I mean, they have cash to burn. So, and we talk about this all the time. Facebook bought Instagram as an ultimate hedge. Two reasons: they didn't want Instagram to surpass them, and also they kind of saw the writing on the wall that younger users were starting to migrate toward Instagram, while older users were starting towards Facebook. So, and as a founder, you could say, well, why didn't Instagram hold on and compete against Facebook? Well, take Snapchat, for example, or take Yik Yak, for example. There's been so many social networks that were like, oh, this is the next big thing. And they got Foursquare's another one. They got billion-dollar valuations. And they really were. They're like, nope, we're going to hold out. We're going to compete with Facebook. In a couple of months, they were basically, begging for money to keep their doors open. So as a founder, as a company, it's a big, big risk not to take those acquisition dollars.
And it's tough not to take that cash too. I mean, you really have to be tied down to a product not to cash out.
Right. And these companies we're talking about are so talented in the tech world, they can kind of bluff it as well. Like Facebook has released a whole bunch of Snapchat features, and they're like, all right, fine, Snapchat, you don't want to sell it to us? We'll build it ourselves. And maybe it's successful, or maybe it's not, but it scares the target company and being like, oh crap, they're building exactly what we have. Maybe we should just sell out before they kind of have our entire portfolio of features.
Yeah, it's a repeating pattern too. I mean, it's actually really interesting because it's almost like crowdsourced innovation. These companies are so large now that they can basically say, let's let everyone else figure out what the next big thing is going to be and take the risks. Exactly. Because then either we'll A, buy them at some point in the future, or B, throw a bunch of resources at that product and build it ourselves. I mean, that's exactly what YouTube did with streaming video games. So Twitch has created this huge market for streaming video games, and Twitch is huge right now. It took YouTube less than a year to build out gaming.youtube.com, which is basically Twitch for all intents and purposes.
Right.
With maybe slightly less features, but obviously features that YouTube could build out in a heartbeat.
Or exactly right.
Google
and so when and the examples are endless. So for example, this Disney acquisition of Fox, a lot of that was to build up Disney's streaming capabilities, because now they're going to be able to stream ESPN, which is basically every sport. And they're building their own streaming services. We talked about building their own type of stuff. And now they're going to have a controlling stake in Hulu as well. So they're going to be able to compete directly against Amazon Prime and Netflix with a huge presence in the streaming content world. And it's another reason why I contend that Netflix, which had a banner year, by the way, their stock price was up like 9% after earnings came out. But I still say watch for Amazon to buy Netflix and kind of add that to their holding, because again, that's another arena where these big companies are competing against each other. Apple is creating original content. YouTube is now creating original content. Like, that is the biggest threat to themselves, is they kind of get lost in their own war against each other.
Yeah, and maybe Amazon will buy Twitch too, just to compete with YouTube on that front. But
sure.
That's what's tough to me, is to imagine a scenario where anyone comes in at this point and steals or even slows down the I guess the monopolizing of the market shares that these companies have.
It's interesting because we did talk about on our pop-up episode yesterday a sort of backlash that's coming against mainly Facebook and Google, as people are starting to be distrusting of those two as they start to get too big. So that's something that could, if I would be concerned if I were Facebook a little bit. Google not so much, because you don't if you really want to find stuff, you're going to use Google. No one really uses Bing. People just say they use Bing. No one actually uses Bing.
Yeah, and the amount of capital it would take to even start to build a competitor to Google at this point is basically, it makes it a non-starter.
Right.
You're an established company that wants to give it a shot, like Microsoft.
Yeah, well, and even Amazon, which this is still around, but they launched A9, which was a search engine to compete against Google, and it just failed. Every attempt, no matter how much backing it's had, has been a failure when you go against Google. So I just don't see anyone overtaking search. It would take a shift in the way we search for things for Google to be threatened, and I don't even know what that would be, what that shift would be, because the first thing that comes to my mind is like some sort of like implant in your brain. But even then, the data that is connected to the implant would almost certainly still be connected to Google.
I was going to say Google would probably be the company that bought that company.
Right, exactly. So I just don't see how, no matter how distrusting you are of Google, no matter how conservative you are and think that they have a liberal slant on their search results, I just don't see them ever going anywhere. Facebook,
do you think there's, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, like Facebook, I don't know. I hear people saying, my argument whenever people complain about Facebook is, well, just there's other social networks. Just go to those other social networks. And their argument is valid. Well, then I can't, and I don't understand it because I don't really care about this, but they'll say, well, then I can't keep up with people's weddings and when they have babies and all this stuff. And if you care about that, you're right. You can't, because for the same reason, Google is where you go for search results. Facebook is where you go if you want to know what's going on in your network's lives. It would take not you leaving Facebook, but you and all of your network to leave Facebook to actually completely abort on Facebook.
Until people move over to Posthost. Check out posthost.co.
That's right.
For an alternative to Facebook. Is there a role here for the government to play? Is there any sort of concern with how big these companies are getting and how much control they have over the industry itself? And I guess how easy it's been for these companies to expand their already incredibly large market share?
Yeah, well, obviously there's regulatory issues or potential regulatory issues in forms of antitrust. We saw that with Microsoft back in, I think, early 2000. However, of the five, well, Disney's now going to face that with their acquisition of Fox. But I don't think there'll be a problem there. I really don't see that as being a problem, especially since Rupert Murdoch owns 21st Century Fox, and he and the president are on good terms, or at least appear to be. The only other ones on that I would look out for is Amazon. So as they move into brick and mortars, now they have in Seattle, they have this totally humanless store. And as they're sort of acquiring other companies, in the retail marketplace, like Whole Foods.
Yeah, there's an Amazon locker at my Whole Foods now.
Right. So you could see that, although the antitrust says that like the consumers' options are limited. Basically, antitrust is all about like hurting consumers. Amazon is doing wonders for consumers. I get it. If you're a business, you don't like Amazon. But if you're a consumer, you're getting stuff faster and cheaper. You're not being harmed at all if you're a consumer.
It seems like historically antitrust lawsuits have come up when nefarious business practices have taken over. So price gouging and stuff like that. And it seems to be the exact opposite is happening in these cases.
Yeah.
Except for maybe the iPhone costing $1,000. I wish there was some sort of regulatory pressure there.
Yeah. And usually antitrust comes in industries that are not well understood. The whole Microsoft thing, I don't think anyone really understood what the competition was being hurt there. And you see it in industries that are tightly regulated to begin with. Pharmaceuticals, for example, where the Rite Aid acquisition, was it CVS, or CVS was going to buy Rite Aid, and that got hung up in regulatory issues forever. So I don't see any direct regulatory issues on the horizon. Another one that could end up being in that arena is Google Fiber, as Google kind of expands their ISP capabilities to compete against Comcast and Time Warner and things like that. That may come up, but I just don't see the government saying we have to fracture your search offering kind of thing.
Here's another possible tack that companies could take, and let me know what you think about this, but would it be potentially feasible for a tech company to expand in an arena that's not directly related to these big five and then sort of swoop in from like a flanking position? So I'm thinking here of like, if Tesla can get big enough with its automobile operations, its battery operations, stuff like that, it's space technology, could it then make a play in one of these big five arenas once it got big enough?
That's a really good point, because that's what Amazon did with AWS. They kind of swooped in out of nowhere and took over the cloud computing industry, just because they had a lot of excess capacity in terms of compute units. So that is an interesting point. Tesla would be in a good position to compete against them. For example, if the fossil fuel industry kind of started to collapse and everyone was moving to electric powered things, that would give Tesla so much cash that they would be able to compete against the biggest of the big. Same thing with, I mean, it sounds crazy, but this is another way it could happen. If we colonize Mars, and SpaceX is on the forefront of that. And
I think when.
Yeah, right.
Within our lifetime, we'll be on there.
So when we colonize Mars, and if SpaceX or other companies on the forefront of that, and they start at Mars laying the infrastructure for some of the things we already have here, that could be another way that these companies fall behind if they don't have that inroad into kind of the new colony kind of thing.
Is there any possibility of foreign companies competing at this point? So I'm trying to think of China's search engine. That's it. That's it exactly. Is there any chance that they could then make inroads outside of the countries of their origin?
Yes. And we're under an administration right now that is very nationalistic. Up until this presidency, we've been pushing for kind of a global presence, or to be part of a global economy. This administration is starting to pull away from that and look more at, like I said, America first. Let's focus on America and do what's in the best interest for Americans. The potential problem with that is, I'll use an analogy. If there's like a global disease, and we live in America and we're like, oh, we don't want to try to cure this disease. We're just going to close off our borders so no one can come in, and then that disease won't get into our country. Well, it finds a way to get into that country. And if you're not busy preparing a vaccine or an anecdote or whatever, anecdote or an antidote to that,
or an anecdote, a good anecdote can.
Anecdote. It was like this one time I got really sick. I mean, it was so if you're not prepared and you just try to shut yourself off from it, it's worse when it does break down your doors. That's kind of what we're trying to do right now with trade and corporations. Is focus everything on America. Well, the rest of the world is still connected, and if innovation in the global scene outpaces innovation on the national scene, then that creates a bunch of problems for us falling behind and being overtaken in a lot of industries.
There's one other topic I want to touch on, and we're already at 26 minutes. So I think we're going to eliminate the 20-minute phrase from our intro and just go as long as we need to on each episode, because what the heck.
We ain't paying the bill.
And
our bandwidth.
That's right. What might be interesting is, do you foresee any of the big five's core industries sort of falling by the wayside? So I can think of two possible examples. So imagine that VR takes off in a huge way and people just stop buying physical products, which would immediately eat into a ton of Amazon's business. Or another one, if people flip to start consuming, and I guess they're already doing this in a large way, to not consuming, I'll call them blockbuster media products. So you might just stream YouTube or watch stuff on Twitch, or even consume, lower budget stuff on Netflix or Amazon Prime, which would eat into, I guess I would call it Disney's core competency, which is producing incredible media products. Is there any realistic possibility that any of these big five could just completely fall off the map, disappear?
Yeah, and actually, I think that Disney would be the most vulnerable there, because Disney is so reliant on entertainment, whether that's movies, theme parks, or sports, as they're the biggest sports provider in the world. So if people in mass, which they already have, to your point, start finding alternate ways to entertain themselves, we've already seen attendances down at sports arenas. We've already seen that viewership is declining for certain sports. If VR takes off, why do you need to go to a theme park? You've got a theme park right on your head. If you can participate in live sports like you're actually there, why are you going to go watch it in arena? Same thing with actual streaming content, with movies, with television shows. If you can live a TV show, why are you going to turn on ABC, for example? Why are you going to go watch The Little Mermaid? I think you're going to see Disney. If we're thinking about this, I guarantee you Disney's been thinking about this. And so that's why I would expect them have them make a big play into that arena. Do they already own EA? Does Disney own EA? I think they might.
I'm looking that up right now. Yes. No. We'll keep going. Let me double check this.
I think Disney is going to look into acquiring these companies or making big investments into this technology to start producing kind of VR-ish type content to get ahead of this. Maybe even adding space in their theme parks for VR kind of entertainment. So if you don't have a VR headset at your house, it takes up a lot. They can put a lot more rides in the theme parks if they're just VR headsets. It's kind of, think about the old Star Tours where you just sit in the thing and you feel like you're actually moving.
I'm still getting used to my programming. That one.
Yeah, that's it. That takes up a lot less real estate than a roller coaster, for example, which needs a lot of space. So I could see Disney making some serious investments in the VR realm and video game realm.
That's what's interesting to me too about the VR realm, and it's also, I think, the 3D printing realm gets into this, but the idea that people won't need to buy stuff as much as they used to. It actually even cuts into potentially Apple's hardware industry. If you don't actually have to buy a MacBook to have what is essentially a functioning MacBook in your VR headset.
Right. Right. And we've seen some cannibalization already with phones and tablets. A lot of people just don't need a computer anymore because everything they would do on a computer, they can do on their phone or tablet. If you take that gaming aspect out of it and put it into a headset, you've kind of removed that as well. So there's a lot of cannibalization that these companies could try to fight, obviously, because they control such a big market share. But it's like we talked about on another episode, innovation always wins. So it's better to try to figure out how you can use innovation to your advantage rather than try to stifle it. We saw what happened with that with the music industry. The music industry, instead of trying to figure out how they could use pirating to their advantage, tried to fight piracy, and they lost big time on that. And piracy, whether you agree or whether you like it or not, is a form of innovation. The file sharing is a form of innovation. So you can never fight innovation in the long term. You can only figure out a way to use it to your advantage.
Innovation always wins. Well, that's a good place to stop 32 minutes later. Check us out on gunnertech.com. We'll have a blog post up about this episode next week, next Wednesday. Keep an eye out on iTunes for our podcast, the Kindle store, the Nook Books and iBooks for our upcoming ebook about our JavaScript series from December. Check us out on Facebook to enter our Country Shore giveaway. And I think that covers everything, right?
I think that's it. I think you got it all.
And tune in next Thursday, 1 p.m. Eastern time for the regularly scheduled Gunner Technology live stream. I'm Derry Merkins. That's Cody Swan. Thanks a lot, everybody.